It was a scorching summer morning in a small village on the outskirts of Texas, where the earth cracked beneath the weight of drought and dreams that refused to die. The air was heavy with heat, and the smell of dust and sunburned grass hung thick across the open fields. In the middle of that endless land stood a man named Jack Turner, his shadow long and thin beneath the ruthless sun. His hands were rough and callous, his shirt soaked through with sweat, and beside him lay a broken plow tied to an old horse that had long lost its strength. The creak of worn leather and the groan of the earth were the only sounds that filled the silence of his struggle. Jack was a farmer, not by choice, but by inheritance, a man bound to his land by blood and memory. His father had farmed these same fields before him, and his grandfather before that, both men believing that hard work and faith could conquer anything. But times had changed. Machines had replaced men, technology had replaced tradition, and Jack had been left standing in the middle of it all, proud, stubborn, and nearly defeated. Each morning, long before the first light touched the horizon, he would rise quietly from his worn bed, pull on his faded boots, and step out into the cool darkness. The world before sunrise was still kind, whispering promises that daylight never kept. He would walk past the barn, now half collapsed from years of storms and neglect, and begin his day with nothing but determination and aching bones. Without a tractor, every task took twice the effort and 4 times the time. Jack's plow had been broken for months, but he couldn't afford to fix it. His horse, old and weary, strained with every step, its ribs showing through the skin. The land that once thrived with green wheat and tall corn now looked barren, wounded by drought and neglect. The last storm that had passed through had torn away his crops, flooding the low fields and washing away weeks of backbreaking labor. When the sun finally rose, painting the fields in harsh gold, Jack straightened up and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked toward the small farmhouse at the edge of the property. The paint had peeled away, the roof sagged, and the wind whistled through cracks in the walls. Still, that house was home, the place where his wife had cooked her last meal before she passed, the place where his young son Eli waited each evening, hoping his father would return with good news. On the kitchen table lay an envelope from the bank. Jack had not opened it yet, but he didn't need to. He already knew what it said. The last time he'd spoken with a man from the bank, the words had been cold and sharp. "Mr. Turner, if you can't make your next payment, we'll have no choice but to proceed with foreclosure." That word, foreclosure, had burned itself into his mind, echoing louder with each passing day. But even as the world closed in around him, Jack refused to bow to despair. When his son asked him one night, "Dad, are we going to lose a farm?" Jack placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and forced a smile. "No, son, we're not losing anything. I've got my hands, my will, and this land. That's all a man needs." Yet deep inside, Jack knew those words were more hope than truth. His hands were cracked. His will was weary, and his land, was slipping away from him like sand through an open palm. As the day dragged on, he worked until the sun bled into the horizon. His back ached, his throat burned, and his body begged for rest. But he didn't stop. Each furrow he dug felt like a battle between survival and surrender. He thought about selling the horse, maybe even the land, but those thoughts tore at him like blades. This wasn't just soil, it was legacy, the story of his family written in dirt, sweat, and tears. When dusk arrived, he leaned against the fence, gazing over the quiet fields that once thrived with life. The wind whispered through the dry stalks, carrying the faint smell of rain that never came. He thought of his father, who used to say, "A man's worth is measured by the way he treats his land." Jack wondered if he was failing both. The sound of the screen door creaking pulled him from his thoughts. Eli stood there, holding a small glass of water, the last bit from their rain barrel. "Here, Dad," the boy said softly. Jack took it, his hands trembling slightly, and drank slowly. "Thank you, son," he murmured. As the night fell and the stars began to appear, Jack sat on the porch steps, staring into the darkness. Somewhere far away, he could hear the faint hum of engines, tractors, trucks, machines that belonged to other farmers who had the means to move forward while he was stuck in the past. Still, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow will be better." It was a promise he had made every night for years, a fragile thread that kept his spirit alive. The truth was, he didn't know how many more tomorrows his farm had left. But as long as the sun rose, and as long as he could stand, Jack Turner would keep fighting for the land that had raised him, broken him, and still called his name. Because for Jack, this wasn't just about farming. It was about honor, legacy, and the unyielding belief that even the poorest man, standing on his own soil, could still hold more wealth than the richest man without roots. One long, wind-bent afternoon, the kind of day when the air seemed to shimmer above the ground, Jack Turner was bent over his field again, turning the stubborn earth with a rusted spade. His shirt clung to his back. His hands were cracked open at the knuckles, and sweat rolled from his forehead into the dust below. The sound of the wind brushing through the brittle stalks was the only rhythm that kept him company. He didn't expect anything different to happen that day. Life on the farm rarely brought surprises anymore. It was the same sun, the same soil, and the same fight to hold on. Then, from the distance, came a sound that did not belong there, a low hum, smooth and steady, nothing like the roar of old trucks or tractors. Jack straightened, shading his eyes against the glare. Down the narrow dirt road, a black car glided toward him, its surface gleaming like polished glass. It slowed to a crawl as it neared the edge of his field, tires crunching softly over the gravel. The sight of it alone drew the attention of a few neighbors, who peeked from their porches, whispering among themselves. No one in that town drove cars like that. Jack watched as the car came to a stop beside the fence. The engine went quiet, and for a moment, silence returned to the air. Then the door opened with a soft click. Out stepped a tall man dressed in jeans, a simple jacket, and a cap pulled low over his sunglasses. There was nothing flashy about him, yet something about his presence demanded attention. He stood still for a moment, looking over the vast, dry landscape as though he were studying it, then began to walk toward Jack with slow, deliberate steps. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans, unsure what to make of the stranger. He squinted under the sun. "You lost, mister?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. The man smiled, a quiet, thoughtful smile. "Maybe I am," he replied. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the kind of confidence that made people listen. "I'm looking for real stories, real people." Jack tilted his head slightly, confused. "Real stories," he repeated. "All you'll find here are hard days and broken tools." The man gave a small laugh, then reached up to remove his sunglasses. Jack blinked in disbelief. He knew that face, not from the town, not from the state, but from television, newspapers, and the world beyond his reach. For a moment, his breath caught. "Elon Musk," he whispered. You're that car guy, the rocket guy." Elon laughed softly, the sound genuine and unguarded. "Guilty as charged," he said. "But today, I'm not the car guy or the rocket guy. I'm just here to learn." Jack stared at him, the words struggling to make sense. Elon Musk, the billionaire genius behind Tesla and SpaceX, standing in his dusty, forgotten field, talking like an old friend. It didn't feel real. Elon stepped closer, his eyes sweeping across the scene, the cracked soil, the broken plow, the tired horse standing patiently nearby. He didn't look disgusted or distant, the way most rich men did when faced with poverty. Instead, he looked curious, even humbled. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, feeling suddenly embarrassed. "Sir," he said slowly, "I don't have much to show. Just a man trying not to lose his land." He gestured toward the horizon, where the dry field stretched as far as the eye could see. "This place has been in my family for generations, but now it's just me, my boy, and whatever the Lord leaves behind." Elon nodded, saying nothing for a long moment. The wind tugged at his jacket, and the faint hum of insects filled the silence between them. Then he spoke, his tone quiet but certain. "You know," he said, "someone from a nearby town told me about you, the farmer who still plows by hand. I had to see it for myself." Jack chuckled bitterly. "That's not exactly something to be proud of these days." "Maybe not to some," Elon said, glancing toward the horizon again, "but to me, it means something." Jack frowned slightly. "And what's that?" Elon turned back to him. "It means you haven't given up," he said simply. "Most people would have walked away a long time ago. You stayed. That's rare." Jack didn't know how to respond. Compliments were not something he heard often, especially from men like this. Staying's not always noble, he muttered. Sometimes it's just because you've got nowhere else to go. Elon smiled again, but there was no amusement in it this time. Only respect. Or maybe it's because you still believe in something, he said. And that's exactly what the world needs to see. He walked slowly toward the plow, running his hand over the rusted metal. You've been doing this the hard way, haven't you? Jack nodded. The only way I can afford. Elon crouched, studying the machine as though it were a piece of art. Then he stood, brushing the dust from his hands. You might not have the newest tools, he said, but I think you have something far more valuable, the reason we build tools in the first place. Jack frowned again, puzzled. What do you mean? Elon looked him square in the eyes. You might have more to show the world than you think. Jack stood silent, unsure how to take those words. Around them, the evening light had started to soften, turning the fields a deep golden hue. The air grew still, heavy with the weight of that moment. Two men from opposite worlds, standing in the same dirt, both seeing something neither expected. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt something stir inside him, a faint spark of hope he thought he'd buried years ago. He didn't know why Elon Musk had come to his small, forgotten farm or what he intended to do next. But somehow, he knew that this meeting would change everything. They sat beneath the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the field, its branches stretching wide, as if trying to protect them from the merciless afternoon sun. The dry earth beneath them was warm and rough, and the hum of cicadas filled the still air. Jack Turner leaned back against the trunk, his hands resting on his knees, while Elon Musk sat beside him, silent and thoughtful. For a long time, neither man spoke. It was a kind of silence that carried weight, the silence of two people from different worlds trying to understand one another. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was a quiet exhaustion beneath it. He began to tell Elon about life as a small farmer, the kind of life most people forgot existed. He spoke about the endless struggle to keep the land alive, about how each season felt like a gamble with nature, and how one bad harvest could wipe away everything a man had worked for. He described how technology, once a promise of progress, had slowly become a wall that separated the rich from the poor. Machines used to be tools, Jack said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Now they're lifelines, and the price of one could bury a man in debt before it ever helps him. Elon listened closely, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. He didn't interrupt or offer solutions. He simply listened, as though every word mattered. Jack talked about the banks that refused him loans, the nights he spent awake worrying about his son's future, and the ache of watching his land dry up year after year. I've done everything I know how to do, Jack continued. Worked from dawn to dark. Fixed the same tools over and over. Tried to save every dollar. But it's never enough. Feels like the harder I work, the further behind I fall. Elon nodded slowly, as if absorbing each word. So, he said quietly after a pause, if you had a tractor, just one, what would change? Jack's eyes softened. He thought for a moment, then gave a tired smile, the kind that comes from years of surviving, without much hope. Everything, he said simply. With a tractor, I could plant faster. I could harvest more before the rains come. I could work the soil the way it needs to be worked. Maybe even hire a few men from town again. Feed more families. Keep the farm alive for my boy. He looked down, drawing lines in the dirt with his finger. With a tractor, I have a fighting chance. Elon leaned forward, his gaze sharp with curiosity. What if, he said carefully, I told you there's a way to make that happen. Not just for you, but for every farmer like you? Jack laughed softly, shaking his head. Mr. Musk, he said, with all due respect, people like me don't get miracles. We work, we hope, and sometimes we lose. That's just how it is. Elon didn't flinch. Maybe it's time that changed, he said. Jack looked at him, unsure if the man was serious or just being kind. There was something in Elon's tone, something calm and certain, that made Jack pause. He wasn't speaking like a man making promises he'd forget. He spoke like a man already imagining the solution. You really think someone like me could change anything? Jack asked, his voice quiet but filled with disbelief. Elon met his eyes. I think people like you are exactly the reason change should happen, he said. You work harder than anyone, but you're the last to get help. That doesn't make sense to me. For a moment, Jack didn't know what to say. He looked out over his field, the same land he'd cursed and loved in equal measure. He thought about the years he'd spent fighting alone, and how strange it was that someone like Elon Musk, a man from a world of rockets and machines, was sitting here now, talking about farmers like him. You talk about change like it's easy, Jack said. It's not, Elon replied, his tone quiet but sure. But it's possible, and sometimes all it takes is one person to prove it can be done. He rose to his feet, brushing the dust from his jeans. The light had begun to shift, turning the fields into shades of amber and gold. Elon looked out at the horizon, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if already seeing something that wasn't yet real. Then he turned back to Jack. "I'll be back," he said. Jack pushed himself up, frowning slightly. "Back? You mean here?" Elon smiled faintly. "Here," he said. "I've got an idea. It'll take some time, but I think you'll like it." Jack wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught him better. "I've heard words like that before," he said quietly. "Nice words, but they don't fill the soil." Elon stepped closer, holding Jack's gaze. "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep," he said simply. And with that, he turned and walked back toward the car. The door closed, the engine started, and the sleek black vehicle rolled away, kicking up a trail of dust that hung in the evening air long after it disappeared down the road. Jack stood there beneath the fading light, watching the dust drift and settle. He wanted to laugh, to shake his head, to call it all a strange dream. "I'll be back," he muttered under his breath. "Sure you will." But deep down, something in Elon's voice had been different. It wasn't empty talk. It carried weight, an unspoken promise that lingered even as the last bit of sunlight vanished behind the trees. For the first time in years, Jack felt something stir in the quiet corners of his heart. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't belief. It was hope, small, fragile, but alive. And though he didn't know it yet, that single meeting under the oak tree would soon change not just his farm, but the future of farmers everywhere. 2 months later, on a gray, overcast morning, Jack Turner woke to the distant sound of engines rolling down the dirt road that led to his farmhouse. At first, he thought he was dreaming. No one ever came down that road unless they had a reason. He wiped his eyes, stepped onto the porch, and listened again. The sound was growing louder, steady, powerful, and unlike the clattering of old diesel trucks that usually pass by, it was smoother, deeper, almost like a low hum carried by the wind. Jack's brow furrowed as he walked out onto the path, the cool morning air brushing against his face. The clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of rain, and the smell of wet earth lingered faintly in the air. Then, as the first vehicle appeared over the hill, his heart nearly stopped. A line of sleek electric trucks, painted in silver and white, rolled toward his farmhouse. Their bodies gleamed under the dim light, and they moved almost silently, except for the faint mechanical whir of precision-built engines. Jack stood frozen as the convoy came to a halt in front of his property. The neighbors had begun to gather along the fences, whispering and pointing, unable to believe what they were seeing. The first door opened, and out stepped a man Jack would never forget. Elon Musk. He wore the same calm expression, the same quiet confidence that Jack remembered from their talk under the old oak tree. He smiled as he approached, the sound of his boots crunching softly against the gravel. "Jack," he said, his voice steady and warm, "meet the first prototype of the Tesla Agri-Tractor, 100% electric, self-charging, and built for farmers like you." Jack stared at him, speechless. Behind Elon, the tarp covering one of the trucks was pulled away, revealing a machine unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It wasn't bulky or rusted like the tractors he'd grown up around. It was sleek and smooth, shaped with clean lines and bright panels that caught the faint light. The tires were wide and heavy, yet perfectly balanced, and a logo glowed faintly on its side, the unmistakable Tesla emblem. Jack took a hesitant step forward, his eyes wide. "You actually built it," he said under his breath, barely believing his own words. Elon nodded. "We did," he said, "but this isn't just for you, Jack. This is for every farmer who's ever been told they couldn't afford progress. Jack's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. The people from the nearby farms were gathering now, forming a small crowd along the fence line. Some had their phones out, recording the moment, while others simply watched in stunned silence. No one in their lifetime had ever seen anything like it. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black key fob. He handed it to Jack. "No payments, no contracts, no conditions," he said firmly. "You've inspired something much bigger than you realize. All I want you to do is show the world what this can do." Jack looked down at the key in his trembling hand, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mr. Musk, I don't know what to say." Elon smiled softly. "Then don't say anything. Just drive." Jack climbed into the driver's seat, his fingers shaking as they brushed over controls. The cab smelled new, clean metal and fresh leather, and the dashboard lit up with soft blue lights. There was no ignition sound, no grinding of gears, just silence and possibility. He pressed the start button. The tractor came to life with a quiet hum, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Jack gripped the wheel tightly and eased it forward. The machine glided over the soil without effort, its wheels turning smoothly, its electric motor whispering instead of roaring. It cut through the field with perfect precision, the blades digging deep and clean. Jack stopped for a moment, looking back at the furrows behind him, his vision blurred with tears. For the first time in years, the land looked alive again, turned open, ready to breathe. His son Eli came running from the porch, his small boots kicking up dust. "Dad!" he shouted, waving his arms. "It's working. It's really working." Jack laughed, the sound breaking through his tears. "It's working, son. It's really working." Elon stood beside the truck, watching the scene unfold. His hands were in his pockets, and a quiet smile tugged at his lips. "That's the future right there," he said softly, almost to himself. Word spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, videos of Jack driving the Tesla agri-tractor filled social media feeds across the country. The sight of a weathered farmer guiding a futuristic, silent machine through his field captured the imagination of millions. People called it the farmer's revolution. News anchors replayed the clip again and again, calling it a moment that bridged the gap between tradition and technology. By the end of the week, Jack's farm had become a destination. Journalists, photographers, and other farmers traveled from miles away just to see it with their own eyes. But Jack didn't see fame or fortune in it. What he saw was hope, real, tangible hope that the world had not forgotten people like him. When the crowd finally left and the fields fell quiet again, Jack parked the tractor at the edge of the barn. He stood there for a long time, his hand resting on the metal frame, feeling its quiet warmth. He turned to Elon, who stood nearby, and said softly, "You didn't just give me a tractor, you gave me back my life." Elon looked out over the field, the lines of freshly tilled earth stretching toward the horizon. "No, Jack," he said, "you gave all of us a reason to keep building." The clouds finally broke that afternoon, and rain began to fall, the first rain the land had seen in weeks. It soaked into the soil, washing away the dust, and for the first time in years, Jack smiled without fear. He had his land, his son, and a future that no longer felt out of reach. A year later, the Turner farm was unrecognizable from what it had once been. The barren fields that used to crack beneath the sun now shimmered with life. Rows of green stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with golden wheat, swaying in the morning breeze. The Tesla agri-tractor stood parked under the old oak tree, gleaming faintly with dew, as it belonged not just to the future but to the soil itself. Jack Turner walked the fields each morning with quiet pride, his boots sinking softly into the rich, fertile ground that had once turned to dust beneath his feet. What had started as one man's struggle had become a movement that reshaped farming itself. The story of Jack and his electric tractor had spread far beyond his small town. Videos of his first test drive had inspired thousands of farmers, engineers, and dreamers around the world. Within months, Elon Musk and his team had launched an ambitious new initiative, Project Earthgrow. It was a global mission to create affordable, sustainable, and intelligent machinery designed specifically for small and mid-scale farmers. Factories began producing the agri-tractor at a fraction of the cost of traditional machines. powered entirely by renewable energy. Within a year, fields from Kansas to Kenya were being plowed by Tesla's quiet, self-charging tractors. For the first time, innovation was not just a privilege for the rich. It was a tool for the humble and hardworking. When a journalist from a major network sat down with Elon Musk and asked what had inspired him to take on such a massive global project, his answer was simple and sincere. Because one man reminded me that innovation means nothing if it doesn't help the hands that feed us, he said. The words echoed across the world, becoming a quote printed on posters, news headlines, and classroom walls. But for Jack, the fame never mattered. He didn't see himself as a symbol, just a farmer who got lucky enough to meet someone who cared. He invested his newfound recognition, not in luxury or comfort, but in education. On a small patch of his land, he built a training center for young farmers, a place where they could learn modern techniques in sustainable agriculture and technology-driven farming. The building was simple, red brick walls, open windows, and the faint hum of solar panels on the roof. He named it the Earth Grow Learning Farm. Every morning, Jack would stand at the edge of his property, watching the sun rise over the endless green. His son Eli, now taller and more confident, worked beside him, handling the machines with the same wonder his father once had. Sometimes Jack would smile and whisper under his breath. It started with a broken plow and a man who believed. Elon Musk never stopped checking in. Once a year, without cameras, press, or speeches, he would drive out to the Turner farm in a quiet electric truck. There would be no entourage, just Elon and Jack walking side by side to the fields, talking about soil, rain, and the future. They would speak not about profits or publicity, but about purpose, about what it meant to create something that outlasted fame. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the fields glowed in the fading light, Elon paused and looked out at the horizon. "You see that, Jack?" he said, his voice low but full of meaning. "That's where hope lives." Jack nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "And this time," he said, "it's planted deep." The two men stood in silence, listening to the soughing of the wind and the quiet pulse of the machines in the distance. Progress and nature breathing together as one. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack realized something that stayed with him forever. The future wasn't built in labs or offices. It was born right there, in the soil, in the hands of those who worked it, and in the hearts of those who dared to dream. The farmer and the innovator had changed the world, not with power or wealth, but with belief. And in that quiet corner of the earth, hope had truly found a home.